Imagine surviving one toxic marriage just to end up in a second one that is even messier than the first situation. This marriage is now full of lies, manipulation, cheating, and a whole lot of drama that nobody really wants. This is The Perfect Divorce by Jeneva Rose, the sequel to The Perfect Marriage. Here is the sequel that I did not need and I did not want, because apparently the first book wasn't chaotic enough. The author thought they'll do it again, and somehow this one manages to feel just like the same drama in a slightly different trench coat, complete with a very predictable ending, one that I worked out from very early on in the novel, but I read it anyway. So unfortunately for both of us, here we are with a recap. If you want to see my rant about how much I did not like the first book, you can obviously go over here, click on the link in the description and find that recap, especially because you do need to know what happened in the first book in order to understand and sort of put things together now in the second one. And I'm telling you, once you read the first book and work out everything that happened at the end of that and who done it, this one will be quite, I think, easy to work out as well for yourself. This is the sequel where every character had 12 years to grow, reflect, make better choices, but instead they choose violence, they choose cheating, and again they choose illegal activities. Welcome to Twist, the whole insane story told, where we break down the entire plot of the most chaotic books on the internet, and that chaotic book, of course, is The Perfect Divorce. Today I'm going to be going into the full spoiler recap of The Perfect Divorce by Jeneva Rose, the whole plot, the twist, the character chaos, and that ending that I think basically copies the same formula from the first book, which made it very predictable at the end of the day. If you are someone that enjoys messy rich people, suspicious cheating spouses, and thrillers where everyone needs therapy and needs to be put into jail, then of course you are in the right place for today's full recap. But here I am about to ruin the whole book for you with enthusiasm, which also means that I will be ruining probably ending of the first book. So if you don't want that to happen and you want to read it yourself, of course, exit out of the video, maybe come back and review after that. And definitely I will be telling you what happens at the end of this book and my opinions on it. Before we get into the recap of the book though, I will have to give you some trigger warnings before we continue on, because this story does include divorce, it does include kidnapping, self-harm, adult content, and violence. If any of that is not for you, absolutely skip the book entirely, and maybe this is not the right video for you today. Otherwise, let us get into this fantastic disaster. Now, we pick up after the event of The Perfect Marriage. As I will tell you in my rant review of the first one, at the end of that, you find out that Sarah, our main protagonist, is at fault for everything. She is the mastermind, she planned it all, and she got away basically with murder. She caught her first husband, Adam, cheating on her, and then instead of just confronting him or divorcing him like a normal person, she decides then to unalive his mistress and then frame him for her death, and then patiently waited 10 years for him to be basically sentenced to death by the state. And the very next day, she marries a man named Bob Miller, who, if you have read the first book of Watch My First Review, you'll know that Bob Miller was her work nemesis. Another lawyer who openly bickers with her, but secretly plots this elaborate scheme to get her first husband out of the picture. Honestly though, that man didn't do very much from the first book. He kind of was just around. He's not that smart. He's certainly not likable. In fact, I am very surprised that this woman who is meant to be so brilliant and clever and beautiful and self-sufficient decided to marry this man in the first place. At some point, I think Sarah, our protagonist, needs to realize that sometimes it's better to go it alone than to be poorly accompanied by a mediocre man. But of course, I will get into my reasoning for that later. The book opens up with Sarah Morgan, the central protagonist, sitting across from her now second husband, Bob, with their respective lawyers, getting ready to divorce this man she has been with for the last now 12 years. She doesn't seem too upset by it, since she's always believed that she would one day divorce him anyway, because men are like lawyers and can't be trusted. then lady, if that's what you think, why did you bother marrying them in the first place? Like I said, is she afraid of being alone? So accomplished, but yet still has to marry mediocre men. Bob, though, of course, wants to reconcile, which makes sense because it's not Sarah that's in the wrong. He's the one who cheated and expects her just to forgive him and forget. Do you know that this woman is not the sort of woman to sort of forgive a cheating husband? You know what she did, and Bob does know what she did with her first husband. So to me, you're just an idiot if you think that you are better than Adam was and that you are any different, that she would forgive you but not him. The divorce, though, isn't just about splitting assets because together they do have a daughter named Summer. The name Summer is interesting for those of you who know about the first book because the mistress of Adam was named Kelly Summer, who is the woman that Sarah unalived to plot her revenge against Adam. Sarah internally admits that she named her daughter to honor Kelly Summers and her unborn child. Because yes, Kelly Summers, at the time of being unalive, was pregnant with somebody's child. How unhinged is that? Because it's not as if she did it because she felt any guilt about unaliving a woman, more like she did it to control the narrative of Kelly's death. Almost like she's absorbing Kelly into her own life story after destroying hers and making sure that she doesn't have a future for herself. This makes Sarah seem deeply possessive and psychologically twisted. Why would the writer want us to hate the main protagonists? I'm not too sure. Or was the intention to make us feel that she was remorseful? Because that's not how it came across in the book at all. In fact, it just made her seem more unhinged and very calculated and manipulative. But it does seem that at least Sarah does have some sort of feelings because she does adore her daughter Summer and is probably the only person in the world that she cares about. So there is no way she's going to let Bob just have custody of her daughter. No, she wants full custody and she says to Bob, "You're lucky. The worst thing I'm going to do is divorce you." Obviously a threat. She's not wrong there. But Bob won't be going down without a fight because he is a bickering man. Although he is an unlikable man, he is still more clever and devious than Adam was from the first book. So maybe there will be a battle. Let's see how that goes. Although Sarah's marriage is unraveling, her career though is pretty and dandy. She is no longer working at a firm where she met Bob, but instead she found her own charity called the Morgan Foundation. And she still practices law, but does it all on pro bono basis because she is, as to the world, a saint. Except it seems she might have done this for more selfish reasons, like as she says to our audience, she did it for the tax benefits because running a charity has all those tax benefits that she can absorb. It polishes her public image and she has political influence, and I suspect it helps her with a good networking system now she has. So all of this is all wrapped up in a very sweet bow just to disguise it as goodwill when really I think she's doing it more for selfish reasons. Like I said, the author is definitely not keen for us to like Sarah, or if she does, the author is definitely doing it in the wrong way. Through her charity work, Sarah does meet this man named Alejandro. He is a former gang member who spent 10 years in prison, who is on the Reformer program. And this is a program that is being selected by Sarah's organization to give basically what's called a second chance program, which provides formerly incarcerated people with housing, with transport and employment resources, so to help them get a job and to get them sort of absorbing back into society, which is a good cause on the surface level. Her soon-to-be ex-husband nominated Alejandro for the program, which in itself is a little bit suspicious because Bob, like Sarah, doesn't really do anything for other people. They always do it to benefit themselves. But I suspect Sarah is overlooking this fact at this moment because Alejandro, as she describes it, is quite a looker. He's quite hot and she enjoys the eye candy, I think. Alejandro is like this hot bad boy with tats and all that, so a big contrast to Bob, which probably is why Sarah is a little bit more interested in that, something a little bit different from the beige Bob that she has. And she even describes it as good looking enough to be a model. Quite a cliche line for all books, for all movies, but That is what we're working with here in this book. Now, throughout this book, there will be chapters from a perspective of an unknown character. We don't know who this person is yet. And you'll find out very fast that this person is a woman. She seems to be kidnapped or held captive somewhere. We don't know yet because she doesn't know. Unfortunately, she is chained, she is dirty, and it's evident that there is minimal food given to her and minimal water. And it turns out that the food and water that is provided to her on sporadic days seems to be laced with substances that keep her a bit phased and a bit dazed and sort of knocks her out and makes her fall asleep, or when she is awake, she doesn't really 100% know what she's hearing or seeing, and everything just seems fuzzy. Obviously, this character will eventually collide with Sarah's story, but not for a while. So we'll just get that perspective here and there. And then we're just trying to wonder what's happening until later on you will sort of piece it all together. Now, amongst this drama divorce, the former Sheriff Ryan Stevens, who was the main sheriff that was investigating the murder or death of Kelly in the first book, was arrested for drink driving and hits a jogger who unfortunately passes away. And there is a news report that revealed his DNA does match the evidence from Kelly's death, because if you remember, or if you've read it recently, in the first book on Kelly, they found 3 sets of DNA, one of them being Adam's, so Sarah's husband, because they had a rendezvous that day and it was still on her. And there was also a set of DNA which was Kelly's husband, Scott, because Kelly was also married and just having an affair as well as Adam. And then there was a third set of DNA that they never really pinpointed until the end. And that DNA belonged to Sheriff Ryan because he too was sleeping with Kelly. Sarah did find out that this set of DNA did belong to Sheriff Ryan, but she obviously kept it to herself because she wanted her husband to be convicted and she didn't want anything to muddy sort of that verdict. This new revelation, though, comes through, and it goes through to the new sheriff, Sheriff Marcus Hudson, who originally was the sheriff's deputy in the first book. So we do know and have met this character before. And then because of this fact coming out that there was another set of DNA and it sort of makes the conviction seem a bit dubious on Adam, he reopens the case and raises public, obviously, doubt about the original conviction of whether or not did really Adam do it or not. Because now it's all come out into the open that Adam's conviction was not maybe entirely right, his mother, Eleanor, who also appears in the first book, wants to now file a lawsuit against the sheriff's office for concealing evidence and a wrongful death suit. And she's accusing Sarah of mishandling Adam's case, which makes sense, because she never liked Sarah and also because Sarah was the lawyer acting for Adam. Nothing really happens to Sarah, though, despite her ex-mother-in-law's antics, but she does get hassled by reporters because of this news coming out. But luckily, Alejandro was in the neighborhood and acts as her personal bodyguard for the day and helps her sort of get away from the reporters, which then this leads her to find out that he's having trouble finding work because obviously of his criminal records. So she offers him the job to fix and stain the deck of her lake house. So she's going to get him to come over and be pretty much a handyman for her. In the meantime, Bobby here is still trying his best to win back his love, Sarah, showing up at his old house with a bunch of roses and wants to explain that, you know, the cheating wasn't really cheating because it was just a one-night stand, saying that it was just a mistake, the biggest one that he's ever made, and it doesn't mean anything to him. This book is full of cliches, as if you do read it yourself. If you enjoy that sort of writing, then maybe you won't be as annoyed as I was, because when it comes across in truckloads of this, I just get over it and be like, well, this is just bad writing, isn't it? So it does seem like Bob was drunk on the night that he had this one night stand. Not that it's an excuse or anything, because he says after this function that he has at work and he gives his speech, he doesn't really remember anything else that happened after, including the woman he slept with. He doesn't really even know her name. But Sarah doesn't care. She's not budging on her decision, and she's basically going to kick this man out and say goodbye and no second chances here. As the legal battle intensifies between the two, women connected to Bob, unfortunately, begin to vanish. Firstly, a woman named Deanne Walsh shows up at the sheriff's office and reports that her roommate, Stacey Howard, has unfortunately been missing for 3 days and she can't get a hold of her. And Deanne said that she did receive a text message from Stacey before she went missing, which says that she was planning to meet up with a guy and his name was Bob Miller. Doesn't look great for Bob right now, does it? It turns out that the woman that Bob had a one-night stand with that he can't seem to remember at all is named Stacey Howard, the very woman that went missing, in her mid-20s with long red hair, high cheekbones, and plump lips, as she's described. Bob identifies her by a silver necklace with the letter S on the pendant on the night that they met, and sort of these are only a few of the details he does recollect. Following their encounter though, Stacey does allegedly steal Bob's Rolex and cash from his wallet and later tries to extort money from him by threatening to tell his wife about their one-night stand. But it doesn't really matter anyway because Bob comes out and tells her because maybe he was worried that Stacey was about to reveal it, so he thought, I'll get front and center. If I'm honest about it, maybe she'll forgive me. But you know, Sarah's not the forgiving kind, as we know. The police questions Bob. Although they don't have much evidence to actually arrest him, he is unfortunately identified now as their number one suspect, and they're sort of watching out and watching his move. But as the book is being so obvious with pointing the finger that Bob is the one responsible for Stacey's disappearance, and I know that Bob is too stupid, I know that this is just a red herring and not to be believed. Bob automatically thinks that, this is something that Sarah likes to do, which is frame her exes or frame her cheating husbands for crimes that they did not commit. And he's adamant that Sarah has something to do with Stacey's disappearance based, of course, on what she did with Kelly and Adam. And now she's his number one suspect. But of course, Sarah doesn't know what he's talking about. Is she lying? I would say she is. Though a background check Bob gets his lawyer, Brad, to run on Stacey Howard, finds a few interesting things, which is she is known to be someone that extorts the men that she tends to sleep with. She has been charged with extorting a congressman a few years ago, but just got a slap on the wrist and nothing else happened out of that. Interesting, but maybe not shocking. What is more interesting though is that Stacey's name ends up on the Morgan Foundation's external payroll list and is a paid contractor by Sarah's charity company. So it does look like Sarah knows Stacey because the woman worked for her. Things then go from bad to worse from our little Bobby here. Later, his hairdresser, Carissa Brooks, disappears from her salon, and the salon is found ransacked and covered in blood, including Bob's and Carissa's. And it turns out that Bob's was her final client for the night on the night that she disappeared, which is very coincidental. When Bob again is questioned by the police about Carissa, he says his blood was only at the scene because during the haircut, she accidentally cut him and that she seemed really anxious and distracted the whole entire time. So he's not the one to blame. Obviously, there was something non-towards that she was, scared about, but had nothing to do with Bob. Evidence, though, doesn't show anyone else in there, Bob, except for you. But it does turn out that Carissa has a violent ex-boyfriend named George. George does get questioned by the police as well, but he seems to be a bit of an a-hole, but doesn't seem to be the one who did anything to Carissa because he seems to have an alibi on the night that she disappeared. And Sarah is also linked to Carissa, again, a coincidence. It turns out her charity did some pro bono legal work for Carissa in the past. And because Sarah knows about her violent ex, they did help her get a protective order against George on two occasions. But that protective order seemed to be almost expiring or has expired at the time that Carissa sort of disappeared, which could be pointing figures at George. Again, I would say another red herring because it was being too obvious. Now we go back to the unknown woman that is being held captive, and it turns out she is no longer alone. There is a second captive now that has joined her in whatever location she is, and this person identifies herself as Carissa. Obviously, whoever is holding Stacey captive has also now kidnapped Carissa. coincidence. Lots of coincidences in this book. Bob, on the other hand, does some questionable things as well. After his separation from Sarah, Bob starts sharing custody of Summer, his daughter. And one time when Summer was staying with him, he just leaves her all alone for like over 3 hours, and Summer sort of injures herself because she's trying to reach for something high off the shelf. And when Sarah's like, oh, why have you injured yourself? And Summer goes, oh, I had to go, climb up to the top and reach for something. And Sarah's like, well, why didn't you get your dad to help you? She's like, oh, he just went away for like 3 hours. I don't know why. Obviously, when Sarah found out, she was, rightly so, quite pissed at her husband for leaving her daughter all alone. But she never really finds out where he goes. A lot of part of these book writing, things and conversations get brought up. One person denies it, the other person tries one more time, and then nothing else happens, and then they just move on for the conversation, and we never get a complete answer anywhere, and it never loops back to it. So it's just like wasted words or wasted pages just to maybe hit a word count or something, but it adds zero value to the story or even to building up the character. I think maybe it's to create some mystery, like, ooh, maybe he's going to go and check up on Stacey and Carissa, and that's why he had to run away for 3 hours where they're captive. But I don't think, if he's only getting custody of his daughter once in a while, why would he waste his time doing that while she's there? He could totally do it when she's with her mother. So that was just sprinkled in there and went nowhere again. Of course, Bob confronts Sarah about knowing Stacey, but she said that her assistant Anne takes care of those things and she doesn't know anything about it. But obviously, Bob knows she's lying. He accuses her of hiring Stacey now to sleep with him, and he's not entirely sure, though, why Sarah might have this motive, but his gut feeling says Sarah's behind it and there's too much coincidence there. And I think, as the reader, I also think, yes, it's really coincidental that Sarah knows both of the women that have been taken, and it seems like Bob, again, is being framed by it, because you get Bob's point of view in this book as well, and at no time is he implying that he did anything to these women, and I don't think he is a unreliable narrative here. Now, the sheriff's office, so Sheriff Hudson, is now looking at multiple cases, including reopening Kelly's investigations from book one, and things start to look really bad for the old Sheriff Stevens, the one that they found the DNA on, and then Stevens, from this revelation that, now the world probably thinks that I'm the one that unalived Kelly, attempts to take his own life in jail, and he ends up in hospital, so he at least doesn't pass away. But whilst he's in hospital, unfortunately, someone shows up and unalives him. So we say goodbye to the ex-sheriff Ryan, and he just disappears out of the story. But we will find later on who did it. Whether or not you think it adds to the rest of the story, that is for you to judge. For me, I was like, I guess this is just like a way to wrap up the story maybe a little bit, but I don't know what this subplot was for. Like I said, the new Sheriff Hudson has his hands full reinvestigating Kelly Summers' death, working out who now has unalived Ryan Stevens, the old sheriff, and there are now 2 women missing under his watch. Although, just like the last book, the police are fairly useless in this case, so don't expect too much from them, despite the fact that Sheriff Hudson is adamant that he's going to be so much more different than the last sheriff. I mean, he doesn't end up sleeping with any of the people he's investigating, so maybe that's a slight improvement. Otherwise, he just discovers what he needs to discover at the right time, is all I can say at this point. But they do work out who unalived Ryan Stevenson by watching the hospital surveillance cameras and discover that Kelly's husband, Scott Summers, who had left town a while ago, had returned, obviously, after knowing the fact of the DNA. He came back to basically get revenge for the affair that this guy had with Kelly, because at the time, Scott also worked for Ryan as a police officer, and, he broke bro code. So he's come back and unalived him for the revenge and for his disgraceful code of conduct. So it seems somewhat unfair that all this man did was cheat with your wife. You thought that was worth taking his life, but that's how the book seems to go. Once you cheat, you're no longer worth to live. That's the game. And after they discover that Scott is the one that unalived Ryan, they just leave it as it is and say, oh, well, he's a fugitive now. We've got better things to do, and nothing really comes out of that subplot. And all Sheriff Hudson says is that, well, he thinks now this guy, he's not a danger to society. But I was like, are you serious? This man, firstly, in the first book, you find out is abusive to his wife. So he's a violent man. He pretty much goes and attacks Adam when Adam was first arrested for the unaliving of Kelly. And without asking any questions, he just basically pummels him at the police station. And so obviously this man has a very violent streak, and now he's unalived someone. So he's not a danger to society, if you say so, Sheriff Hudson. Like I said, police here are very mediocre. Sarah now officially files for divorce, and Bob handles the news as well as you expect. Badly, loudly, and very dramatic, like a true villain that he's trying to be. He tells her he never fully trusted her and always knew that he needed an insurance policy against a woman like her, just in case she tried to do to him what she did to Adam, which is a very romantic sentiment. If that is what you believed, again, I'm saying, people, why did you marry each other? Not only did you marry each other, you also bred together. That is not appropriate. So his big threat is that if Stacey Howard doesn't magically reappear soon, he's going to go straight to the police with his insurance policy. And Sarah's immediate thought after he says that to her is, you know what? I really should have killed him when I had the chance. Not like I should have just not married him and stayed away from him, but no, I should have just unalived him, which is alarming, but very on brand of Sarah, if you know Sarah. And after so many pages, I think I know how Sarah thinks, which is, you do me wrong, I unalive you, or I frame you for something else. Bob's so-called insurance policy turns out to be the knife that Sarah used to unalive Kelly in the first book. This knife still had Kelly Summers' blood on it. The problem is it doesn't have Sarah's fingerprints though, because she was smart enough to at least, use gloves or wipe that off. His master plan to checkmate Sarah is kind of just more mild and inconvenience for her. He's just going to hand in the knife, or get his lawyer Brad to hand the knife over to the police and to raise more suspicions on Sarah and possibly himself. But they both have alibis. Sarah had an alibi because she was hanging out with her assistant Anne, and Bob had an airtight alibi too. So I don't know what this insurance policy is going to do, because it doesn't seem very concrete. After Bob gives Brad this insurance policy to go take to the police, you see that he gets a text from an unknown number, and he looks at his phone, and the text basically says, plans have changed. Meet tomorrow at that boutique hotel off 28 near Sedley, 11A, room 518. Maybe Bob's having another rendezvous. Maybe I'm thinking, Bob, if you're going to have an affair during this time where you're trying to get your wife back or going through divorce, try to keep it in your pants during this stressful time and find another moment to do that. But maybe that's the sort of man that Bob is. So we know he's not the best of man. So maybe you're not even surprised that this is something that he might do. In the meantime, while Bob is having his rendezvous or secret meetups, Alejandro starts working on the deck at Sarah's house, and she's spending a lot of time perving on him, flirting with him, and so definitely there is a lot of tension between the two. And there's flirting not only in person, but they sort of text each other and flirt on that as well. And surprise, surprise, they end up having a romantic dinner together at Sarah's house. They have a pleasant dinner together that Sarah made, some salmon, some veggies, whatever, and they talk about the most mundane, uninteresting things, and then suddenly they do it. Sarah is lying in bliss on her bed after their little rompy-pompy in the sack, and she feels this cold metal press into the side of her abs. And it's not what you think it is, right? Or it is what you think it is, because it is a pew-pew. Alejandro then turns to her and say, "I'm sorry, Sarah," and pulls back the hammer of the pew-pew. Turns out that person that Bob was meeting up with in room 518 was none other than Alejandro. Obviously, he knows this man because he was the one that nominated him for Sarah's foundation and that second chance program. It is also revealed that 15 years ago, Bob hired Alejandro to unalive Kelly, his brother's wife, previously known as Jeneva, because he wanted to keep her from exposing his shady past. Here we thought he wanted her unalived because he thought originally that she had unalived his brother and ran away and got away with it. But no, it's for more selfish reasons, which again, I'm not surprised because like I said, Bob does selfish things. However, that assassination agreement between him and Alejandro, however, this assassination plan goes botch. When Alejandro breaks into Jenna's home and he's waiting for her to return from work, it ends up that she has delays and she's late home, but instead Bob's brother, Greg Miller, shows up instead and Alejandro goes to use his pew-pew, but it's jammed. As Greg sees Alejandro's face and sees this stranger in his house and is like, what is this tough looking guy doing in my house? He obviously tries to fight him. And Alejandro and Greg get into a bit of a tuffle. And Alejandro then grabs a kitchen knife and plunges it into Greg's gut. Alejandro then purposely stabs Greg repeatedly to stage it as a crime of passion. When Jenna finally arrives home, Alejandro is slipping out of the house and she sees Greg with the knife in his gut. And in a panic, what she does instead of calling the ambulance is that she tries to help Greg out by pulling the knife out of his chest because that's where it's lodged now. Obviously, there is then blood that splatters out and it probably unalives Greg quicker and it doesn't look good because her prints are all over the murder weapon, which is why in the first book, Jenna is the one that's accused for unaliving her husband, but she gets out of it and she leaves and changes her name and becomes Kelly, which means this whole time Bob Miller has still lived under the belief that Jenna had unalived his brother and Alejandro wasn't the one that unalived him and he just sort of didn't do what he was meant to do and unalived Jenna, and so that failed. So in present time, Bob has decided what to give Alejandro a second chance of assassination, even though he failed in the first one, to now unalive Sarah at the dinner that he's going to have with her. So he can get full custody of Summer and pretty much stop her from framing him for Stacy's disappearance or worse, her death. Bob receives a message from Alejandro that says the deed is done. With proof that it is done, there is a photo of Sarah looking lifeless, lying on the bed, with blood smeared across her face, her body, and surprisingly, sheds a tear because even though he planned this and he's the one that hired Alejandro to do this, to unalive her, he still loves her, right? Little weirdo. So at the same time, he says he's both elated and heartbroken from the news. Also, he's very proud of himself because now he's outsmarted and maneuvered the great and powerful Sarah Morgan. He opens his phone to delete the tracker that he has once put on Sarah's car and notices that in the afternoon before that dinner date, she did go to this unknown location. And he's like, oh, I need to know where she went because he has this suspicion that this unknown location is probably where she has stashed Stacey, and he's going to go there and hopefully release her, and then he will be scot-free and also a widower and free of Sarah and her clutches. So while we are, listening about this toxic relationship over here, our poor Stacey, who's being held in captivity, and now as we found out in a basement of an abandoned house, things are getting worse for her. She's being obviously fed food laced with substances that keep her in a permanent daze and frequently render her unconscious for long periods of time. And like I said, at some point, she did get herself a new roommate who is named Carissa. While they were both being held in total darkness, Stacey and Carissa obviously strike up a conversation and she asks Carissa, what do you remember about being taken? Because obviously Stacey doesn't seem to remember too much. And Carissa describes the situation. So Carissa says she was in her salon with her last client of the day, who she identifies as a man named Bob. And Stacey immediately follows up by asking, is that Bob Miller? And Carissa confirms it sounds like that's his name. And Stacey reveals that she had a one-night stand with this guy named Bob Miller. And so going back and forth, Carissa goes, well, I do have memory of being in the back vehicle. She heard him talk to himself or someone else about how he wasn't going to let her get away with it regarding maybe his wife and that he would take her down first. Based on these shared details between the two of them, the two women have now concluded that it must be Bob Miller who has taken them, and he seems to be quite a psychopath because he's abducting them both to cover his tracks. Maybe I know why he would have taken Stacey, but I don't know why he would have taken Carissa to cover any sort of tracks, because he didn't have any grudges with Carissa apart from maybe a bad haircut. But that doesn't seem valid enough. So that bit was a little bit wishy-washy for me. But I think at least maybe Bob has a fetish of taking women, and Stacey was a victim, and now Carissa is his second victim, or maybe more than one. While they're in captivity, Stacey obviously in and out of consciousness. One time she wakes up and she notices that it doesn't seem like Carissa's in the room anymore. And then she hears noises upstairs or just above her, because obviously she's in the basement. There is noises just sitting above her, where she hears like heavy work boots walking along the floorboards. And then she suddenly hears violent struggling involving screaming, and she thinks it's Carissa screaming for help. And then suddenly there's a loud thump, and then there's a sound of a body being dragged along the ground. Stacey is convinced that Carissa has been unalived by who has taken them, which they at that point have determined that is Bob. So Bob's in the house for whatever reason. He's taking Carissa upstairs and he's, gotten rid of her. Stacey starts to panic. She starts to feel around for anything that she can find around her, maybe tried to get out of the chains that she's tied to. But instead of finding maybe something that she could remove the chains of, she finds a pew-pew in the basement. And she's thinking, wow, maybe the person that took them maybe dropped it by accident when he was coming downstairs to take Carissa back upstairs. And now she's got this weapon to hopefully protect herself. Now, like I said, because the book is very obvious about pointing fingers at Bob, I know it's not Bob that has been, doing this to the women, even though it's trying to link it so that it is. And Bob does follow the GPS tracker to the location that Sarah went to, because this is where he thinks she's taken Stacey and he needs to release her. So he goes to the location and he finds the abandoned farmhouse, which is where Stacey and Carissa are being kept. So naturally he ventures inside and he tries to listen for sounds, and he sees a staircase leading down to the cellar, to the basement. And so he goes and descends it. As he's walking down the steps, he sees Stacey. And Stacey looks back at him and she looks terrified, obviously, because she thinks this is her captive, and she fires the pew-pew. There was 2 shots in the pew-pew and she fired both of them, hits Bob, and instantly Bob passes away. Because I said the police don't have any evidence about Bob taking the women, but they're still suspicious of him. They've been tracking him and sort of following him around. And so they followed Bob when he went all the way to the farmhouse where the 2 women are kept. And while they're outside sort of just watching and staking out and see what he does next, they hear the shots being fired. So naturally they go inside. Sheriff Hudson arrives with a SWAT team and enter into the cellar, and they find Bob unalive on the floor now. And Stacey is still chained up to a pole and she's weeping uncontrollably. And she's got the empty revolver in her hand that she's just used. Stacey is rescued, luckily, and taken to the hospital. Obviously, she is not in the best shape of her life, and she tells them that she was in the room with also Carissa, and now Carissa's disappeared and she's heard all this screaming and noises upstairs, but they don't know where she is. Possibly she is unalive, because they did find a lot of blood upstairs and they seem to belong to Carissa. It seems to match the DNA that was also found in the salon, and it seems very likely that something happened to Carissa or Bob did something to Carissa. The police is like, okay, we would better inform his wife, Sarah, because they're not quite divorced yet, about what happened to her husband. But Sarah's not alive, because just being unalive by Alejandro. So who knows what they're going to be finding when they go knock on the door. So they go to their house, they knock on the door, and no one comes there. They knock again, wait 30 seconds, and again, no one's answering the door. At this point, the police are like, I think something's happened. We need to go knock down the door and just break in and see what's happened to Sarah. Then suddenly they hear the lock unlocking on the door. A deadbolt slides away and the door opens. And on the other side of the door stands Sarah Morgan. What? Are you surprised? I wasn't, because I knew Sarah wasn't gone. I knew it, because it's the same thing that happened to the first book. The author tries so hard to make you think that Sarah is the genius of this book, that for sure I knew it was the same MO. I wanted it to be different. I wanted there to be another mastermind that could take Sarah down, because I think Sarah is a despicable person as well. I don't think Bob is great, but I don't think Sarah great is either. But no, same MO, same thing. Boring. It's just boring. Let me not keep ranting, because there is more to this story, and I'm going to show you the ridiculousness of this story as I reveal everything else now. So surprise, or maybe not surprise, simply predictable, Sarah Morgan is alive, because Sarah is always and forever the mastermind of all our lives. And even though, in my opinion, she's a character that does not deserve to win, she is going to. Because let's wind back and explain how she orchestrated this whole wacky plan and everything that you've been reading about. Alejandro was planning on unaliving her. He got paid, I think, $250,000 from Bob, but before he pulls the pew-pew on her, they have a casual conversation while they're in bed together. Alejandro tells her how he was meant to unalive Jeneva, but that didn't really go right, and he ended up unaliving sorta Bob's brother instead. And she knows that Alejandro failed his mission to unalive Jeneva because back 12 years ago, she was the one that actually unalived Kelly later. She knows, like, oh, well, you're clearly not great at doing your job. She then offers to pay Alejandro the same amount that Bob was going to offer him to not unalive her. And he just goes, oh, okay, cool, deal. I'll do it. No worries. Because obviously he does like Sarah more because he, just had a rendezvous with her. So he's like, oh, maybe if I take the money and keep her alive, I get to have more of these situations. So it's a perfect deal for him, right? He also tells her that there is a tracker on her car that Bob's been following her around this whole time. And she's like, yeah, whatever. I already know. Because of course she knows, because her husband's an idiot, but she is not an idiot. And this is why she then let the tracker stay on the vehicle as she drove down to the abandoned farmhouse, knowing that at some point Bob is going to go down there and see what happens. Sarah is responsible for Stacey's kidnapping because this woman is not a prude when it comes to committing crime herself. But Carissa is not dead. She's very much alive. She has faked Carissa's death to frame Bob. Now, she never kidnaps a Carissa. What she does is she fakes Carissa's death to help her get away from her abusive husband. And while everything is going on here, Carissa has escaped to Ecuador, and she's got a new identity. Carissa was never in the basement with Stacey. Instead, that was Sarah who had been in the basement because Stacey was under the influence of the substances that has been in her food, and she was hazy. She didn't really sort of see Carissa's face that well, and she couldn't really tell that it wasn't Carissa. And Sarah could easily pretend to be this character of Carissa, and manipulate her and sort of lead her into thinking that Bob was the one that took them both. Then Sarah staged this violent struggle upstairs using audio recordings and wearing men's boots and stomping around at the top to make Stacey think that there was two people there, that, there was a man and there was a woman screaming and violent things was happening. So when Stacey replayed the situation back to the police, she could convince them to say that Carissa was here and now she's not, and I heard all this violent screaming and thudding and I believe she's passed away. And because there was Carissa's DNA found upstairs in the salon that matched, they automatically think, well, she's right, because it fits the scene that we saw upstairs. And then this convinces, obviously, the police, who can't find Carissa, that she was probably unalived by Bob. And it turns out weeks before Carissa's disappearance, Carissa followed Sarah's instructions to draw and store 5 pints of her own blood. Sarah used this blood to stage the ransack salon and the basement at the abandoned farmhouse, and makes it appear that a lethal struggle had occurred there. While Stacey was still trapped in the cellar in the basement, Carissa was already on her way to her new life, where Sarah provided her with a whole new identity, a new passport, there's cash, a new disguise, and a plane ticket to a new location. And by the time that police unravels everything and tries to look for her, she's already long gone and with a new name, so they'll never be able to really find her and confirm whether or not she is alive or not. So it's the perfect framing, again, to push to Bob. So let's then go back to the knife that was Bob's insurance policy that he gave to his lawyer, Brad, to give to the authorities to throw suspicion onto Sarah. It turns out that the knife that Sarah gave Bob as the murder weapon back when she used it on Kelly was not actually the same knife. Instead of being covered by Kelly's DNA, it was pig's blood. And so the police got it, they tested it and went, what the hell is this? This is a knife that was used on a pig. I don't care about that. There is no crime here. And it turns out she gave it to Bob to test him to see if he would say a loyal fella. But obviously he failed at that one. And he kept it because she wanted him to take it and see if he'll get rid of it for her. And if he did, then she's like, oh, well, he's to be trusted. But if he kept it, then she was like, I know what you're doing. You're trying to keep it as an insurance policy. And that's exactly what he did. But she still married him anyway, even though she knew the facts. So what is this need to marry these terrible men? So she had kept the original weapon herself, and it didn't obviously have any of her fingerprints on it, but it did have Kelly's DNA. And she then planted it with his fingerprints all over it and hid it in Bob's house, in, I think, his safe. Sheriff Hudson then concludes when they searched Bob's house and found the knife that now Bob is the real unaliver to Kelly. Bob was the one that was responsible for Kelly's death, and Sarah gets off scot-free. So now Sheriff Hudson done well, because it looks like on the surface he has solved everything. Bob is the main culprit. He unalived Kelly all those years ago, and he took these two women and he unalived Carissa, and everything is wrapped up so nicely in a perfect bow for Sarah. Like I said, the police don't question anything else. They are there at the opportune time. They find out what they need to only find out, not what is right, but what Sarah wants them to believe, and takes care of everything for her, and it's all dandy. So again, like I said, useless. Question nothing else, and that's it. But wait, there's just a little bit more. Because 1 year passes, we get this view of what happens. 1 year later, Sarah has achieved total, utter victory. She is a public hero who has won a $30 million settlement for Adam's wrongful execution. So not only is she a public hero, she is a rich one. And she was already rich to begin with, so this just adds to her whole wealth, right? A wealthy white woman that gets away with anything. Well, I guess it's slightly better than being a wealthy white man that gets away with anything, but still, it's not great. And the world, including her own daughter, thinks that Bob was the monster who unalived Kelly, kidnapped Stacey, and possibly unalived Carissa as well. Sarah remains in a relationship with Alejandro, with her boy toy, with her, model-like boyfriend now. And she even says that I just keep him around because I like to keep her loose ends close to her, because as she noted that no one would really believe the word of a felon over a grieving, successful widower and white woman. Obviously, I think it's also not safe to have Alejandro around, because eventually I think he will turn on you, because he turned on Bob quite easily. He didn't even turn on Bob for more money. He just turned on Bob for the same amount of money that he was going to offer him. So, like I said, Sarah is not great at picking men, but fantastic at crime overall. And that is the full recap of The Perfect Divorce. And honestly, so perfect for Sarah. Not perfect for me, not perfect for other readers, perfect for Sarah. And everything that happened in the first book, where Sarah somehow came on top with everything tied up in a neat little bow, I wasn't exactly shocked when this happened again by this second book. And I wasn't shocked when there was pictures of her looking like that Alejandro had unalived her. I was like, there is definitely no way that she has passed away. And surprise, she wasn't. But I really struggled to get behind her because she doesn't deserve a happy ending. Let's not forget that she unalived a woman named Kelly only because she was having an affair with her husband. And her husband, I know he was a little dumb-witted and he had an affair on her, but otherwise he was a little bit useless. Otherwise, just divorce him. And because Sarah wanted to divorce him and not have to give him any alimony, she just framed him for someone else's murder. Cheating is terrible. We know that. But does the punishment really fit the crime? Does it really need to be death? Seems slightly disproportionate, but that's what we have to believe and root for here. And then second book, she does exactly the same thing. She traumatizes a lady named Stacey just for having a one-night stand with her husband, and turns it into a whole elaborate plan just to get rid of Bob, because she thought she was going to divorce him anyway and he's not to be trusted. And so yeah, she does some charity work to sort of maybe clean her slate, but I think that's not enough. It's not enough. And also Sarah admits it's just for her own public image and for tax breaks. So again, terrible lady. Sure, she helps Carissa to give her a better life. That I'll give to her. But one good deed doesn't miraculously erase a mountain of terrible things that she's done. By the end, I found Sarah just as unlikable as Bob, and a lot of the other characters, and they both deserve to face their consequences, but I didn't get the satisfaction of seeing Sarah go down. So I want to know, did you think that Sarah deserved a happy ending, or were you sitting there waiting for her to finally also get punished too? Because we never get that satisfaction. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble on about this recap. If you enjoyed it and want more Unhinged books recaps, and tell me which books you want to hear about, leave it in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video. Of course, subscribe to the channel because I really love your support, and hit that notification button so you know when the next video will drop. Have a very lovely rest of the day, friends, and I will chat to you soon.